Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the C40 World Mayors Summit. I hope you enjoyed last night. I think it's time once again to congratulate the winners of the C40 Cities Bloomberg Awards. If you had such a good evening that I had last night, you have really enjoyed yourself. But I see that many of you are still up, and despite the fact that we had a really busy day yesterday, I can see that many people are still energized, and that's good, because I tell you that this final day, we have an as exciting, I would say, even an impressive lineup of speakers and discussions ahead. So welcome to this final day. But before we get started, let me just remind you that you can take part. Also, those who are not in the room but are just watching the live stream, you can get involved in the conversation by following and adding the official summit, following our conversation by following and adding the official summit hashtag, the future we want, on social media. See, yesterday we learned how cities are reducing emissions through innovative programs and policies in all sorts of fields. We were discussing waste and energy and transport and many other things. And we also highlighted how cities are adapting to an already warming climate and building resilient infrastructure. Today's focus will be on how we make sure that as we transition to this green and thriving society, consuming within the planet's boundaries, how can we then at the same time bring everyone on board? That's sort of the main headline for today. So let's get started. I am very pleased to introduce our first speaker of the day, Mette Frederiksen, Prime Minister of Denmark since June this year, where she not only introduced her social democratic government, but also as the first paragraph in her government platform, her first paragraph, stated that Denmark will have to reduce its emissions by 70% by 2030. That's something to be inspired from. The very first paragraph. And the most interesting development since then is that by now, all parties in our parliament, and I tell you we have many, but all parties, except a small one representing only 4 seats, all parties have now endorsed that ambitious targets. And maybe evenly interesting and important, it has also been embraced by the Confederation of Danish Industries. And if you could read our Danish papers today, you could see a front page saying that now a key priority in our finance ministry will be really to green the budget, green the modeling, to have a center of climate simply inside the finance ministry. That is rather interesting to follow, and we know you have a big task before you, Prime Minister, to deliver and implement that, but we are very pleased that you're here. Please, you have the floor.
Morning, all of you, Mr. Secretary General, mayors of the world, ladies and gentlemen. Hans Christian Andersen, or H.C. Andersen as he's named here in Denmark, once said, "Gratitude is the memory of the heart." And today I am very grateful to see all of you here in our capital, Copenhagen. A couple of weeks ago, many of us met on the other side of the planet to the UN Climate Summit. And back there, you, Mr. Secretary General, called on all of us to take action. And I guess this is why we are here today, to shape the future that we want. And all of us, of course, know that climate change is one of the greatest challenges facing humanity. And cities are unfortunately a part of the problem. Today, cities around the world account for 70% of the global CO2 emission. It means that cities all over the world is also a part of the solution. You are the solution. And I'm very happy to say that Copenhagen actually is a good example. Since 2005, our capital has reduced its emissions by almost 40%. And as you probably know by now, Copenhagen aims to be the first carbon neutral capital only 6 years from now. I think what is extremely important to underline is that this is not only a political question and not only a political choice. I can see almost everywhere in Copenhagen that the green solutions nowadays are integrated in our everyday life. Only a few weeks ago, we opened the new metro line, of course, fully electrified, above ground. More than 50% of Copenhageners bike to work, to school, every day, even when it rains like it does today, and I'm sorry for that. And in our spare time, many people bike to the harbor to go to swim, because the water today is so clean. I can tell you, when I was a little girl, it wasn't clean, and we couldn't go swimming in our harbor. And fortunately, the weather in Denmark is often too cold to do it, but still, it's possible. And all this is not a result of fortune. This is a result of political decisions to clean the water, to invest in bikeways. And I think in this way, Copenhagen shows that the long and close ties between pollution and progress are finally broken. That goes for the rest of Denmark as well. Since the Berlin Wall fell down, Denmark's GDP has grown by more than 50%. It's quite something. Yet, in the same period of time, our use of energy has remained constant, and the CO2 emission has actually fallen. And now, as Connie said, we are raising the bar even further. Of course we are. Last year, a unified Danish parliament, and I'm very proud of that, set out to reach climate neutrality with net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest. And this year, my new formerly government set the target even higher, a reduction of 70% in our greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And yes, you heard the correct number. Our reduction target is actually 70% in 2030. Do we know how to reach that goal? To be honest with you, the answer is no. Of course, we have many of the answers. And together with you, we'll find many of the necessary solutions, but not all of them, or at least we don't know all of them yet. And you know what? If you ask me, had we known all the solutions by now, the target of 70% would not have been ambitious enough. And this is, if you ask me, what political leadership is about today. And no country, and no company, and no city can do this alone. We need all cities to act and to make it in time. We must pave the way for green business. We must allocate, and I think this is very important, much more money into green research and development. That's why we have decided to double up what we in Denmark use in green research already next year, double up. We need to ensure more and better cooperation, of course, at national level, city level, global level. We have to push inside the European Union. And we must make sure that I am a social democrat before I got green. And when I wake up in the morning, I am still a social democrat before I am green. And this is why I also want to underline to you that we need to make sure that the green transition that is so important for all of us do not lead to inequality. That's the promise we have to give to the world. It will be extremely difficult, but it's necessary. And we must form new and strong partnerships, as you have already done, between government, cities, private sector, civil society, to include everyone. And as grown-ups, we must listen very carefully to the children, to the youngsters, to the youth people. Cherish their commitment and encourage them to keep the spirit high. Because actually today they speak on behalf of someone else than themselves, on behalf of nature, environment, and the future. And we need to act to improve it all, ladies and gentlemen. Just living is not enough. One must have sunshine, freedom, and a little flower. By this statement, Hans Christian Andersen is right, I think, once again. The future is, and that's the funny thing about being a politician, is what we want it to be. We are carrying it in our hands, and sometimes simple things are made too complicated. If we want to change the way we live today, we can change it. Let's make the greatest cities in the world, the greenest cities in the world. Let's take back the future. Thank all of you. Thank you for engagement.
Thank you to the Danish Prime Minister. Thank you for your leadership and for the strong messages we just heard here, among other things, on research and on the imperative to include everyone. Thank you very much, Mette Frederiksen. When we discuss the global collaboration needed to achieve the future we want, our next speaker plays a key role in the international community. His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, like his predecessor, understands the necessity and the emergency of getting it right on climate. Mr. Secretary General, we are very grateful that you are with us here today. We know that you have a lot on your plate, but thank you very much for being with us, and you have the floor.
Dear friends, allow me to start by confessing my original sin. I have almost 30 years of political engagement in my own country, and I never became a mayor. But during those 30 years, I was always a member of the municipal council of my constituency. I chaired it for a number of years, and I always felt that I would not be able to deliver, namely when I became Prime Minister, if I had not a clear picture about what the people really want. And the only place where we really have a clear picture about what the people really want is when we work at local level, at municipal level. So I'm enormously happy to be with all of you today. And even more happy because with you is the Mayor of Lisbon, and my wife is part of his team in charge of culture in the capital of my own country. So allow me, even if I was never a mayor, to feel at home in this gathering. Dear friends, cities are where the climate battle will largely be won or lost. With more than half the world's population, cities are on the front lines of sustainable and, as the Prime Minister said, inclusive development. With air pollution a grave and growing issue, people look to you to champion better urban air quality. With environmental degradation driving migration to urban areas, people rely on you to make your cities heavens for diversity, social cohesion, and job creation. You are the world's first responders to the climate emergency. Cities have an enormous climate footprint, consuming more than 2/3 of the world's energy and accounting for more than 70% of global CO2 emissions. And the choices that will be made on urban infrastructure in the coming decades, on construction, housing, energy efficiency, power generation and transport, will have tremendous influence on the emissions curve. So I'm delighted to be addressing a group of committed to making the transformation we need in our world. And let us make no mistake, we are facing an urgent crisis. The climate emergency threatens the viability of human societies on this planet. The Paris Agreement represents, it is true, a powerful opportunity to change course, but its promise has yet to be fulfilled. Climate change is moving faster than we are, exceeding worst-case projections. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has made clear what we must do. We must stabilize temperatures at 1.5 degrees Celsius. To get there, we must reduce emissions by at least 45% by 2030 and achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And that is the best available science today. However, current national climate action plans get us nowhere close to these goals. We are on pace for a catastrophic 3-degree or more rise. This would be devastating for humanity and make the world's sustainable development goals totally unachievable. We have the knowledge, the technology, and the resources to address the climate emergency and to promote sustainable and inclusive development for all. What is still missing at many levels is political will. And that is why I invited nations, cities, and businesses to come to a Climate Action Summit last month in New York, together with the governments. And the ask was simple: dramatically boost climate action plans at all levels. Many of the attendees delivered. More than 70 countries committed to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Even, and this even is very important, even though major emitters have yet to do so. We still have large parts of the world with a coal addiction. We still have an absolutely unacceptable number of new coal power plants being planned for the years to come, especially in East Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, but a little bit in other parts of the world. Even if we have to recognize, namely here in Europe, several countries have already decided to phase out coal in the near future. At least 70 countries announced their intention to enhance their national plans by 2020, but it is not yet clear, when we will come to Glasgow, what kind of national determined contributions will come out of it. And some 100 cities during the summit did the same, including, of course, many members of the C40 network. And I want to thank you for your leadership. A group of the world's largest asset owners, responsible for more than $2 trillion, pledged to move to carbon-neutral investment portfolios by 2050. And this was in addition to a recent call by asset managers representing nearly half the world's invested capital, some $34 trillion US dollars, a call for global leaders to put a meaningful price on carbon, to phase out fossil fuel subsidies and thermal coal power worldwide. We must build on this momentum. And it is true that today we can see businesses, cities, and the society moving faster than governments are. And so it's very important to go on putting as much pressure possible on governments to make sure that they always, all of them, accept our carbon neutrality objective for 2050. To bend the emissions curve, nations must continue to increase climate ambition and submit new and improved national climate action plans by 2020. You and the cities you lead are at the heart of this race. By 2050, nearly 7 out of every 10 people will live in urban areas. And over 90% of this growth will take place in developing nations. Without climate-conscious urban planning, the consequences will be profound. And I am pleased that the C40 network is leading the way. More than 80 cities are now committed to the Deadline 2020 initiative to meet the Paris goals. And in the context of the C40's Planetary Health Diet for All initiative, mayors will work with other levels of government and businesses to use their procurement and other powers to help people consume a healthier, more climate-friendly diet. And this is also critical for climate change. Food consumption is responsible for 13% of greenhouse gas emissions in C40 cities, with meat and dairy consumption making up 75% of that total. I also welcome the C40 Clean Air Cities initiative to meet World Health Organization air quality guidelines. 9 out of 10 people breathe unsafe air, and this is unacceptable. And some cities are already taking important action. Copenhagen has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2025, as we have heard again today. And meanwhile, its recycling policies are helping to avoid 20,000 tons of CO2 emissions every year. And even several African cities, including Durban and Nairobi, have installed air quality sensors to better monitor air pollution. And I commend such efforts. But we all need to push further and faster. And I ask you to lead in 4 key areas. First, I challenge you to align your procurement, infrastructure, development, zoning, urban planning, building codes, transport systems, waste disposal and investments with the Paris Agreement, the new urban agenda, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Second, strengthen your national climate action plans and accelerate their implementation. Third, promote new investment and finance opportunities. Many of your cities are innovators with respect to local finance, issuing green bonds, reforming property taxes to reduce urban sprawl, and leveraging your collaboration with the private sector. But many cities, particularly small and medium-sized cities, currently lack the capacity to make use of such opportunities. And I urge you to partner with them to promote investments in climate-friendly urban development. Fourth, I want to emphasize the importance of a just transition to low-emission and climate-resilient societies where no one is left behind. I think the Prime Minister was extremely right. Of course, it is clear that today renewable energy is creating more jobs than fossil fuels and than coal. But it's difficult to explain that to a coal miner. So we need to make sure that we have the social policies that are able to address the anxieties and the concerns of those that can be victims of climate action, even if that climate action is absolutely essential to rescue the planet and to solve our problems. And so we need to have, in education, in lifelong learning, in social policies, in safety networks, all the measures necessary for the green action, the climate action, to also take into account the interests of the people that will be inevitably impacted negatively by them. And bringing them also into this is essential to have our public opinions solidly supporting the objectives we have to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Dear friends, I know many of you are already delivering on bold commitments, and I ask you to keep collaborating, innovating, and raising ambition. The UN system will do everything we can to support your efforts, and we need to get on the road to carbon neutrality for all cities and nations by 2050 and to achieve our 1.5-degree goal. And we need to protect the ecosystems and the biodiversity that sustain us. So let us continue to work together for peace, prosperity, dignity, and the opportunity for all people on a healthy planet. And I thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your strong call for enhanced ambition, while at the same time you're also reminding us of the opportunities if we get it right. And by mentioning, for instance, the food sector investments and other big initiatives showing that also some changes are actually on the way. Thank you very much to Your Excellency. Now I would just take a short break away from the agenda because Mayor Cassetti has asked for the floor just for a short remark. Please, Mayor Cassetti.
Thank you, and let me first start by thanking you, Secretary General, for honoring us being here to be the voice of this world and its citizens today. The urgency of this moment, the importance of action. We are so indebted. You're the first Secretary General to grace us with your presence at the C40 gathering. Let's give another round of applause to Secretary Guterres. Thank you. And to Prime Minister Frederiksen, thank you so much for your hospitality, your commitment, and for the passion you bring to this, the directness, the focus, and the work that we will do together. I know we will take a little bit of Denmark with us, all of us, back to our cities and our countries, and you have been an inspirational leader, not just for this nation, but for our world as well. So thank you. The Secretary General said we are the first responders to climate change. And I regret to inform my fellow mayors and this gathering on what has been an extraordinary few days that I have to leave immediately. We have a fire in Los Angeles that is rapidly spreading to about 1,600 acres and threatens my city. We know this. I said in my introductory remarks, ask a firefighter whether climate change is real. In California, where we've lost billions of dollars of property and hundreds of lives, this is now normal. It cannot be normal for us. We cannot accept that this is the way the world needs to be, so I'll be flying on a plane, and I ask your forgiveness for leaving this a little bit early, and thank you to Mark and his team for their accommodations. I just wanted to restate from yesterday, though, this is the moment for this global Green New Deal, to make this a decade of action, the 2020s, the climate decade, that will define our future, and to bring about the mass mobilization for inclusive change. We will not just aspire, we will act. We will not just debate, we will do what is necessary. And I'm so proud, my brother and sister mayors, to be able to lead this organization alongside you, with the activists, with the businesses, with the labor leaders, and especially with the youth. I was so looking forward this evening to hitting the streets with our young people, who are there every single week reminding us what our mission should be. And let me close with this. I shared yesterday with some of the Danish business leaders that I spoke with a poem by Robert Browning, who wrote a poem about the Italian artist Andrea del Sarto. And the line is, let a man's reach always exceed his grasp. And because it's 2019 and we've been led by an amazing woman, Anne Hidalgo, and we have an amazing woman leading this nation, a man or woman's reach must always exceed their grasp. In other words, we should, as human beings, always reach out for something we don't maybe know whether we will hold. Whether it is freeing our people from colonization, whether it is winning wars to bring freedoms to people but dying on the beaches, whether it's women who fought for women to be able to vote and to have a voice but died before they could ever exercise that right. We are reaching for something now that is beyond our grasp, so that maybe we, and certainly our children and their children, will hold it. Because the second line in that poem says, let a man's reach always exceed his grasp. After all, what is a heaven for? I would offer, what is C40 for? What is this world for if not for that? So let us make sure that our reach always exceeds our grasp. My apologies to this entire gathering. I will be with you, and please keep Los Angeles in your thoughts and prayers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Gassetti. We have full understanding of the situation, and we hope that the situation will be confined as much as possible back home in Los Angeles. Now, I understand we will have a small video here before we move on with the next part of the program.
Nearly a month after Hurricane Maria hit, residents around the town of Dorado keep tapping into this water faucet. The ground is known to contain dangerously high levels of toxic chemicals.
But recently she learned that year after year, she and more than 20,000 others who live nearby have the highest risk in the country of developing cancer from air toxins. The toxin in this case is chloroprene.
Generation to face the problem because of plastic, it is we who will have to take initiative, come here and clean it up. So we are just clearing the mess that was created by our parents.
What they've achieved on this stretch of beach is nothing short of a miracle.
That sets sort of the scene for the rest of this morning part of our day. Our next keynote speaker is a renowned environmentalist and activist. In 1991, Dr. Vandana Shiva founded Navdanya, a national movement to protect the diversity and integrity of living resources, especially native seed, the promotion of organic farming, and fair trade. I could read a very, very long CV on all the things Dr. Vandana Shiva has done. Just to give you a few examples, Time magazine identified Dr. Shiva as an environmental hero back in 2003. And Asia Week has called her one of the 5 most powerful communicators of Asia. Dr. Shiva has received honorary doctorates from several acclaimed universities, and among her many awards are the Alternative Nobel Prize. Let us hear Dr. Vandana Shiva's take on an inclusive and fair response to the climate emergency. Welcome to the stage, Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Dear mayors, at this time of Cambridge Analytica putting on top artificial intelligence presidents and prime ministers, you keep real democracy alive. Thank you. I think we are the first generation who has to think of a possibility of a future. The future we want is a future, not extinction. And every scientific indicator is showing that an economy, a model of science that has put extinction at the center of progress will, of course, have the humanity follow all the other species, the 200 species per day that we are losing. The sixth mass extinction that is 1,000 times more rapid than the normal rate of disappearance of species. So the future we want is not extinction. And that's why the young people are rising everywhere. They are not debating whether extinction is a possibility or not. We've just celebrated Gandhi's 150 years of his birth anniversary. And Gandhi had said, the earth provides enough for everyone's needs, but not for a few people's greed. So inclusion is built into the way the earth works, and the earth is alive. We've been told about a few hundred years ago, around the time when I'm shorter. And that is also a diversity we need, the short and the tall, the fat and the thin. Fossil fuels, which is really the earth fossilizing living carbon over 600 million years. And I think she put it deep down so it could be left down there. And she left the living carbon in the biosphere for us to work with her to increase it. We fossilized our minds and declared that the earth is dead. She's pure inert matter to extract. We created a mechanistic mind and fossilized and desertified our minds of all the diversity of intelligence that we share with the earth. So much new work being done on plant intelligence, on animal intelligence, on our gut, which is called the second brain. And I want to congratulate Copenhagen for making its public feeding programs 90% organic. I think every city should be moving towards fossil fuel-free, poison-free, toxic-free food for their citizens. And that step alone will contribute 100% to the solutions and get rid of 50% of the problem. The production of fossil fuel-based chemical food takes 11 to 15% of the greenhouse gases, including the nitrous oxides that are 300 times more deadly than carbon dioxide in destabilizing the climate. But land use changes and desertification and deforestation, which are usually not counted in the normal emissions from agriculture, it's 15 to 20%. The Amazon is burning today for GMO soya. And we don't need to do that because not only are we losing the lungs of the planet, we are getting bad diets. And why do we have to move junk food around the planet, forcing it on people through so-called sanitary and phytosanitary rules that destroy local food, healthy food, diversity of cultures? 15 to 20% is coming from the food miles, the aluminum, the plastic, and all the styrofoam in the packaging. And then we waste 4%. That's 50% of the emissions. And yet, in our amazing living systems of the earth, and we just have to remember again that the earth is living through her biodiversity and the living functions of the biosphere. The earth regulates the temperature, the climate, and has created the conditions for our species to evolve. This is what James Lovelock, the NASA scientist, reminded us of. And if we work with the earth, and we pull down all that extra carbon dioxide and pull down all that extra nitrous oxide into the plants and into the soil, we can actually draw down 52 gigatons of carbon dioxide. This would keep us within the 1.5 degrees limit. And we'd actually have a green planet, we'd have real food, good food for all people, but most importantly, we'll have work for more hands. Because not only did the fossil fuel era destroy climate, it destroyed our way of thinking, making us mechanical. It destroyed our relationships, making us separate, fossilizing our hearts and not just our minds. And then it fossilized our hands because the measure of productivity in a fossil economy is how many people can you get rid of work. That's called productivity. The input in industrial agriculture is purely farmers, and they're aiming for farming without farmers. But farming without farmers means no one to care for the planet, no one to plant a seed, no one to conserve the water, no one to bring you real food. Farming without farmers means the end of food, and it means an end to the future. And that is why those who have so mechanized their thought are now talking about extinction as inevitable and escape as the new step of progress. And they're spending billions and billions on going to Mars, a dead planet, when this amazing Earth, a living planet, inviting us to take care of her, to look after her. Extinction is not inevitable. Escape is an irresponsibility of the super-rich. Taking care of the Earth in an inclusive way is the future. And there is no place better than a garden where we become one with the earth. You put your hands in the soil, you plant a seed. You get seeds, you get food, and you get yourself. People have forgotten that little children gardening are for the first time getting out of depression. Criminals gardening are getting out of violence. The fossilized economy has told us our hands are useless. Our hearts are dead. Our minds don't work. And therefore, we have to outsource what little we have of our behaviors and our thinking into artificial intelligence, to then have our minds manipulated for a fake democracy. Our challenge today is not just a green agenda. It's not just an inclusive agenda. It's an agenda of an intelligent, compassionate human species. We are capable of that. That's our potential. And my quantum training has taught me that the two things that the mechanistic paradigm killed, which are a part of reality, the part of how nature works, first is non-separability. That was my PhD thesis, non-separability in quantum theory. We are not separable. And therefore, inclusion is the very way of being. Diversity and mutuality are the two fundamental principles of ecosystems and of human societies. And the second is potential. We are not fixed entities, dumb or brilliant, to be disposed of or to go to Mars. We are all having the potential to care, the potential to regenerate, the potential to be one as humanity on one beautiful planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vandana Shiva, for a very, very rich introduction where you really touched upon many crucial issues. We fossilize our minds and economics instead of working with the earth. Thank you so much for these messages. And that concludes sort of the first part of the morning. Now we have had 3 global perspectives, but then we will turn to our next first panel of the day, which will highlight pathways to a just transition and new models for a thriving and inclusive economy. So please join me here on the stage. Stephen Cotton, General Secretary, International Transport Workers Federation. Kate Raworth, Senior Associate at the University of Oxford and author of the acclaimed Donut Economics. I can hear that there are some people who have read this excellent book and the donut is coming there. Yeah, it's not you, Kate, but yeah. And Nigel Topping, CEO of We Mean Business. And to moderate the whole session, we will have David Miller, Director of International Diplomacy at C40 Cities. Welcome to you all.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, panel. I'm David Miller. I have the pleasure of moderating this session. I'm not Eric Garcetti, as you may have noticed, but I think it's sadly ironic the reason Mayor Garcetti has to leave because of the impact of climate change in Los Angeles. And I think Mayor Garcetti's words are a good preface to this panel, because Mayor Garcetti has said we must make an ecological transition, but how, the question we have to answer is, how do people see themselves and their role in the future economy we're going to create through that transition? And so our panel today is going to help us answer that question. And my first question is to Kate. What is donut economics, aside from a large round prop by your knee? And how is rethinking the way we look at bringing about a just transition in city economies? Kate?
Okay, so donut economics is the chance to throw off the fossilized economics that Vandana was just talking about. It's a vision for 21st century economics, because the 20th century symbol of success was this: endless growth. We talked about success in our economies as if just growing endlessly was where we were heading for. And we need a new vision and concept. And so I offer this donut, the giant rubber ring. So imagine humanity's use of Earth's resources. We want to leave nobody in the hole without the resources to meet their fundamental needs of food, water, healthcare, housing, education, transport. Leave nobody falling short in the hole, but don't overshoot the outer ring, because there we put so much pressure on this unique, delicately balanced living planet, we push her out of balance. And this is where we cause climate breakdown and destroy ecosystems and kill our living Mother Earth. So leave nobody in the hole falling short, don't overshoot the planet, meet the needs of all people within the means of the planet. And suddenly the shape of progress is not ever rising growth. It's balance that we deeply know in our own bodies. We need to transform our economies so they start to shape like this.
And can you talk a bit, Kate? I think that's for you.
I think it's for the donut. Don't eat too many donuts, okay? This is the only one that's actually any good for us.
Can you just speak a bit about what that actually might look like in a city economy?
Right. So, sorry, more hosepipe. We have inherited linear degenerative economies, industries that take Earth's materials, stick them in the pipe of production, use them once or twice, and throw them away. And cities are the place where that has happened. We need to turn that linear economy into a circular one, where resources are never used up, they're used again and again, far more carefully, far more collectively, far more wisely. So the first thing that cities can do is make a scan of all the resources that are coming into the city and flowing around the city and going out, and start turning those linear chains into circular ones. And not only do that as a top-down exercise, but bottom-up, encourage the emergence or the rediscovery of the local circular economy. Repair cafes, mending shops, libraries of things, community clubs where people congregate and do this as a community because we love working together. That beautiful video of the children picking up litter on the beach in India, and let that be used again. So circular. Secondly, we've inherited economies through, I think, the rise and the dominance of the corporation in the 20th century has concentrated resources in very few hands. And that's why we have such inequalities, leaving many people not capturing the value generated. We need to create distributed economies that share value with all. Vandana said everything is connectedness. There we are. There's the deep interconnectedness. We need to create ecosystems. And imagine if we have ecosystems of circular resource use. Think of all the jobs that create this ecosystem, the people who need to connect those resources as they are reused. So to me, it's from degenerative to regenerative, from divisive to distributive. Cities can procure, create a circular economy, plant trees, create public luxury. And to me, and there's so much leadership going on in here, and we need to go further.
So, Stephen, there are people employed today in polluting industries who have good jobs, There are people who don't have very good jobs at all, who are not sometimes even protected by the labor movement. If we're going to make a transition of the nature that Kate determines and Mayor Garcetti speaks about, what's the role of labor? What's the advice labor might have about how we do this in a way that's just?
Thanks, David, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I think from Labour's perspective, it's how do we respond to this challenge? It's been a challenge inside all of our sectors to recognise the global crisis will have an impact on individuals. But as Kate speaks, and as we've heard this morning, it is possible. So we think Labour brings a leadership responsibility, a responsibility to communicate to the membership, to society itself about what we can contribute. And when you talk about resources, let's think about human beings as part of that resource. Let's think about our members, the members we aspire to have, making their contribution. And if you look at the challenges in the New Green Deal, bringing some of the C40 policies, like the green and healthy streets, it's vital that our people are part of that dialogue. And if you look at the potential inequality, every speaker this morning spoken about inequality, it is based on gender. We need to bring more women into the process when it comes to transportation, but also across all unionised jobs. But then how do we bring our skills and our understandings in the cities? And I think when you look at all the speakers this week, it's about ensuring that we have a collective voice. And the voice has to be, we have to move fast, we have to understand how we can change. And I think from the Labour's perspective is we need to have confidence in the leaders. It's not always been easy in this political environment at the moment, but we also need to show men and women who are working today, who want to see out themselves to secure retirements, but also the young people, how can we change to be shareholders in the future? So for us in the ITUC and the ITF, we want to be part of that conversation. We want to bring our skills to the table. We know we have to move in different ways. We know we have to respond to the challenges, but we're definitely up to that challenge, and we need partners to do that.
A bit later in the panel, I'll maybe come back to that point and ask you the same follow-up I asked Kate about what practically can cities do, but perhaps we can go to business first. Nigel, your coalition is a group of leading businesses who understand the need to accelerate our environmental transition. How is business part of this conversation about ensuring that that transition is just and is fair and ensures that the needs of workers who are part of the transition and workers who don't have good jobs today can be part of that ecological economy in the future?
I mean, I think leaders in the labour movement, in local government and in business face a very similar problem, that we're all invested in patterns, in ways of thinking and ways of working. We're all invested in them. You know, so there are votes for a Labour leader in existing jobs. There are votes for a mayor in existing jobs. There's comfortable shareholder relationships for a CEO in existing business models. So in a way, we're all colluding in maintaining the status quo. So the number one thing that business and that these other partners, as Steve says, need is honest conversations about the scale of the transition. I actually think sometimes there's a danger in using the word transition. It's quite a nice, soft word, right? The reality is that historically, we've had unjust disruption. That's what disruption comes. We deny it's coming until it's too late. Then we have a cliff edge disruption, and it destroys lives. It's bad for cities. It's bad for economies. Businesses die as well. So collectively, we're very bad at managing transitions. So I think the number one thing is to get into dialogue, and really honest dialogue. You know, I know the work of the ITUC and the Just Transition Centre and the B team have partnered and created a business guide for the just transition. Number one thing is early dialogue. You know, we're working with the investment community now about what we call the inevitable policy response. The science is getting worse. The real world events are getting worse. Mayor Garcetti's trip's proving that. The streets are rising up in anger. The policy response is inadequate. At some point, we'll have to have a correction. If that's not a planned correction, it'll be ugly at all sorts of levels. It'll be capital destruction, job destruction, probably civil strife. So early, honest conversations about what we've really got to do and taking some hard decisions in all of those sectors.
So Thanks, and I think everybody in the panel agrees with that early honest conversation point. Perhaps, Kate, can we explore that a bit more? You know, do you see from the academic perspective, are there some quick wins? You know, are there some low-hanging fruit? What are the more difficult action? And are there any examples historically? This is a big shift, as Nigel just said. And we know from, if you're from my part of the world, the Rust Belt in the United States shows a way not to do it historically. Are there some examples historically that we perhaps learn from to do it the right way this time?
I think there's some examples recently to learn from. The Ruhr region in Germany transitioned 37 coal miners out of coal between 2007 and 2018. That's 11 years. They started with open, early, honest conversations. And they put aside funds, and it's only a small part of the whole, for pensions for those who will retire early, and retraining and reskilling for those who will go into new jobs. California has a solar apprentice program, apprenticing people from declining industries into the solar industry. New Mexico has a fund for workers coming out of oil and gas, and in new construction of new renewable energy, 25% of those jobs will go to people coming out of the old industries. This can be done if you take the workers who are going to be displaced and put money, which is only a small fraction of the total transition, into transitioning them. We can do this. And then so many more jobs are going to be created. But in terms of low-hanging fruit, the low-hanging fruit is to decarbonize. It's the thing that we already know. We have to get out of fossil fuels. We have to have cities that plant trees, buy renewable energy, build public luxury, which means moving cars into a much smaller part of the road and giving over to bicycles and carriages, public transport. And cities that do that build public luxury that, why would you take a car? You want to go on a bike or in a tram or a bus. It's the good thing to do. That's so much cities can do. They can procure differently. Melbourne got together with 13 other organizations, the City of Melbourne, and bought renewable energy from a new wind turbine, changing from short-term energy procurement to a 10-year contract. That means internal conversations within the city. So it means the city has to come together inside its own offices and have tough conversations about contractual things, about buying electricity, bigger group over a longer period of time, and that starts to transform. So there is low-hanging fruit, but it means, like Nigel said, honest, real conversations that actually make these transformations happen now.
I'm struck by the fact you use public luxury. When I studied economics, it was called public good. And I think your words give a much broader impression of the kind of cities that these mayors are trying to create, cities that are very livable. I'm also struck by the examples you gave, because outside of Toronto, my hometown, a General Motors plant is closing. And the workers there want to build electric cars, and they're not getting the opportunity. So it's very, Nigel, can you pick up, I thought Kate gave some very interesting examples of policies and programs. Do you have any thoughts, and as We Mean Business had a chance to think about what cities and mayors can do to help build the dialogue and also from a policy perspective, push things so that they start going in the kind of direction that Kate's speaking about?
Well, let me pick up on the General Motors example, because I'm obsessed by the need to transition 100% to electric vehicles as quickly as possible. I think we can do it in terms of 100% sales by 2030. Detroit has got this wrong in the past, right? In 1973, in the first oil crisis, Detroit ignored all the signs of a transition, right? As a result of which, half of Americans are driving small, efficient European and Japanese and Korean cars, right? Disaster for the industry and a lot of job destruction, a lot of loss of unionized jobs. So bad for the labor movement, bad for business, right? Bad for the city of Detroit, catastrophic for the city of Detroit. Everybody screwed up, right? Same thing's happening now in the States. Fantasy attempt to resist the tide of electrification. So you've got a government resisting it, you've got the automotive trade body resisting it, you've got the companies resisting it. Not so dissimilar in Germany. You know, the Chinese are electrifying at a rate of knots. They're starting to invest in R&D centers in Germany. And yet the German government's slow, the German automakers are slow. Daimler, the inventor of the internal combustion engine, has now committed to being net zero by 2039. If the whole of the industry got behind that, they'd be securing future jobs. Because if they don't secure those future jobs will be in China. So the thing that mayors could do, and this is happening, I know in my dialogues with automotive companies talking about the clean and healthy streets as a very clear future demand signal, wakes up automotive executives. It needs also to wake up ministers of transport and wake up the labor leaders in the automotive industry. They're scared. Transition's scary. If you're a CEO or a labor leader or a mayor, facing a complete infrastructural transition is scary. So I think the main thing that mayors can do is say, we're going to go to a zero emissions city and do it as fast as possible. Industry will respond then, and the labor unions will respond as well.
Can I say one thing?
Of
Change is most scary just before we do it, right? Whether it's the youth leaders who, think of the youth leaders who the day before they went on school strike for the first time. It's scary. Am I really going to do this? An automotive industry leader. Am I really going to dare to make this announcement? But you work with some of the most progressive companies. I'm going to ask you, the companies that are already committed, are they scared or are they mobilized?
No, the thing that takes the fear away is very clear long-term commitments. So when the UK government says, we'll ban internal combustion engines by 2040, everybody can deal with that. When Ola Källenius, the CEO of Daimler, says Mercedes will be net zero by 2039, it flips it from we can't do it, you'll destroy the jobs, to actually we've got great engineers, this has to happen, we're going to lead it. I think it will happen much quicker because there's a sort of ratcheting effect. So it's scary until you make the decision to commit. And we always talk about zeros and hundreds. Don't go halfway, don't say we'll be 50%. Name the 0 date or the 100% date, then people and businesses are incredibly resilient and will respond to that. So you're right, it's scary until you commit, then it's exciting.
Stephen, I was struck by Nigel's point about, in the past we've kind of let things go off a cliff and then picked up the pieces. Do you have any thoughts on how, what we would look for out of the dialogue we need in order to ensure the future of good work, both for union members who are in industry or service affected by the ecological transition? For example, electric buses require just as many or more bus operators, but fewer maintenance staff, for example. Or other ways that mayors and cities can really start to drive this transition so it's a transition, not a cliff.
So we're sitting on a panel and we're bringing different perspectives, but we agree on so much, and that's part of our collective challenge. Where do we agree? So how do we move union leaders from denying there's a crisis into being part of the solution? Well, we've got to start following strong mayors who commit policy, money, re-education, redeployment, re-opportunity. We've got to look at the gaps in our society, particularly in cities, to respond to some of the other questions. Because it's not just a climate change challenge, it's a future of work challenge, it's an inequality challenge, it's an age issue, and it's a gender policy. So for us, practical steps is, where do we take the first step? You can move any union leader when you can show them it's not just words, it's really going to happen. And that's why we're here, because we believe the leaders of the C40 are genuinely taking those steps. And once one starts, we can move everybody else. Our commitment is sharing best practice. Instead of being competitive, we're back to that linear conversation. Let's share best practice. It's not an economic advantage anymore. It's a responsibility to protect each other. And we can talk about precarious work and how will you build the right operators to run your future cities with our public transport campaigns sponsored by the mayors in a round table strategy. And that for us is utterly critical. So, there's a lot of common ground. Where do we sign up? How do we, coalition of the willing. Let's move the first batch of people. I love the idea that we have a deadline, that we can work to a process, and that we deliver strong things for the working men and women, and we give them confidence they have a say about this. It's not just a fear. So for me, where do we sign up? How do we move it?
So I want to pick up on what you just said about precarious work, because I think one of the things that's come out from this panel is if we think ahead and have a dialogue, we can do some of the things that Kate was talking about that happened in Germany, for example, around workers who are already in industries that are impacted, who are unionized and have some collective power. What do we do about the workers who today have very little power? We know that climate change is unfair. It impacts the least well-off, and it was caused by the most well-off. But any thoughts from a business perspective, perhaps Nigel or Kate from economics perspective? Anybody jump in. How do we include them in the conversation as we try to build models for the workers who are affected, the ones who are outside the system now and need the future economy to give them some real hope and a real chance? Any thoughts?
I mean, yeah, my main thought is that we should be careful not to conflate that issue with climate, because I think, seriously, there's a risk that every problem in the world becomes associated with climate. So there's huge disruptions coming from technology, as Vanden was talking about.
Fair point, but the technologies are helping us solve climate,
yes,
so they might be a tool.
So, yeah, again, I think it comes down to honest conversations. I think there's an awful lot of business leaders, and it's not all of them, and we're all agreeing, but not all business leaders and not all union leaders and not all economists agree, right?
But all mayors.
But all mayors agree,
Fantastic.
of course. Yeah.
Absolutely fabulous.
You know, there are aspects of, you know, one of the things that's been most exciting for me today is I moderated a panel yesterday with Fleming, the chair of Carlsberg, a massive business, everybody knows it. I only found out in preparing that it's owned by a foundation, as are several of the large. So there are different ownership models, for example, that don't lead to that obscene accumulation, right, which is so destructive and drives, that kind of systemic inequality, which actually ultimately leads to political stability. So it's kind of, you know, be careful what you wish for. So I think we need deeper conversations, and there are very, very many very aware leaders in all sectors who know we need to ask some of the really provocative questions and come up with alternative answers that Kate's asking. And the answers often exist in pockets around the world already, right? Like this foundation-owned major businesses here in Denmark.
Can I add? So I think a healthy economy...
Quickly.
A healthy economy looks a bit like that. It's an ecosystem of many, many relationships and resource flows. And this is an ecosystem that is a circular economy. So there are waste pickers in here. And as we create a circular economy, we don't displace those waste pickers. We respect that they already have been making a circular economy and then involve them and formalize and recognize their work so it's respected. There are lenders and sharers and makers, and there are corporations that don't try to control their own materials and their own supply chain. They recognize we'll only have a thriving circular economy if it's an ecosystem. So the city can bring all those players together in the plastics industry, in electronics, in waste, and say we have to work as an ecosystem. That will make less precarious but more distributed jobs for everybody.
Kate, Nigel, and Stephen, thank you for your leadership. A very clear vision was articulated today. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much for this terrific panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, not the least to you, David Miller, who literally on a few minutes' notice jumped into the seat and took on the position as moderator. Thank you very much for that. In our next panel, C40 mayors will discuss how they are tackling the dual crisis of inequality and climate breakdown, with the aim of creating a society that benefits all citizens. And I think that everyone who has got anything to do with politics or who carry political responsibility knows that this is exactly where the difficult balance lies. How exactly to balance this and how to balance between the short-term here and now demands and the longer term, that is what comes more and more center stage in the years to come when we are going to deliver on all these things. And to help us sort of shed some light on that problem, we have an excellent panel. I would first like to welcome up here on stage our panel moderator, Michael Jalner, international editor at Politiken, and panelist Ada Colau, mayor of Barcelona. And then we have our mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. And there you will need to wear your headsets to just get it ready, unless you are Turkish speaking. And we also have the mayor of New Orleans, Latoya Cantrell. Welcome to all of you, and have a good panel.
Yes, thank you for welcoming us, and thank you for you coming here. Well, you have already been presented a bit, but I'll present you a bit more. Ada Colau, you are the mayor of Barcelona. Yeah. 10 years ago, you founded the platform People Affected by Mortgages. Yes. You became a mayor back in 2015. And we just discussed before we came here if you are presenting a platform or a party. It's called Barcelona and Como.
Yes.
I hope I pronounce it correctly. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And then Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul since March in 2019, already well known, but you were elected in March.
Since March, then since June.
That's
twice in a year.
You were.
2 elections.
Indeed. And then Latoya Cantrell, mayor of New Orleans. Welcome to you too.
Thank you.
We have called this session "Bold Actions for an Inclusive Future," and we focus on inclusive future. And that is, of course, because climate change is unfair. It was a few developed countries, first of all, who polluted. Impacts are borne by the many. Some are more vulnerable to climate changes than others. We all know that 42 million people is controlling almost half of the world on Earth, whereas it's 1 billion people who lives in informal settlements. And in New Orleans, we knew that Katrina was not hitting everyone equally. 2/3 of lost jobs were actually lost by women, just to take one example. So, Latoya, I would like to start with you. Can you tell us what actions New Orleans is actually taking to be a climate resilient city for all citizens?
Well, thank you for that, and it's always great to be here. As it relates to the city of New Orleans, we just updated and released our climate plan September of 30, so short while ago in terms of updating. At the heart of it has been community engagement. Making sure that you include, of course, the 80% of the city actually that was underwater post-Katrina. And you talked about even those disparities that exist there. But in terms of understanding that our people are still recovering from Katrina and still in the midst of rebuilding, and that I still, under my watch, have about $2.4 billion that I need to get on the ground as it relates to infrastructure. So it's looking at those dollars and how are we reinvesting in communities and in people in a way that we were not before. So a part of that is ensuring that housing, for example, retrofitting, first-time home ownership programs, connecting our people even to jobs in the market of green infrastructure, making sure that that is at the heart of it as it relates to even streets and roads and our community that we live in, that again, that the green infrastructure is there, that we're utilizing the dollars to create bike lanes, that we're holding millions of dollars, millions of gallons of water. We're looking at flood mitigation as well. It is really across the board in terms of how we're looking at, or through that equity lens, meeting people where they are, just being very intentional about that. But through the equity lens and making sure that everyone's a part of it, and listening to the people, the first thing that I had to do as mayor is file a lawsuit against oil and gas. And I did that. And listening to people, and I brought oil and gas, the whole industries, in my office around the table, and they told me how they supported Jazz Fest and the French Quarter Festival, and how I needed to make sure that they didn't leave the city of New Orleans. And I said, great, festivals are great, but you know what? Our people are much greater. And so that has been the center of how we look through the lens of equity, but making sure that those dollars really do hit the ground where people live and they feel connected to the improvements that we're seeing develop.
And where have you faced the biggest challenges? I mean, this is a major task you're describing here.
Sure. Well, you say the biggest challenges. One is bringing your people along as you engage them, letting them know that climate change, it is real. We're now seeing, let me tell you, this summer, we had 2 100-year storms when we would collect like 0.3 inches of rain in 37 days. We got well over 8 in 90 minutes. So it is a reality that's happening on the ground to where people call me and say, well, are the pumps working? Well, yeah, they're working, but there's no way that we can drain a city when you're getting the rainfalls that we're seeing. So a part of it is, one, yes, you have the action plan. Yes, you're focusing on implementing the plan, but you also have to educate and bring people along. And that's why making sure that these dollars hit the street, that people are a part of the investments, that they not only can see, but that they can touch and they can feel. And that really helps. It helps because you have to do both, and you have to find balance in everything that you do.
Ada, you'll be replying now. I just warn you, if you do not speak Spanish, Ada will be replying in Spanish. So put on your headphones if you don't master that language. Last year, Barcelona was actually adopting a new climate plan. And you were focusing on environmental justice and citizen cooperation. I mean, in other words, putting people first. Why is it so important to you in your quest to become a net zero emission city that you have this putting people first?
Thank you.
What we want to say when we say people first, people in the center of everything, is that we want to change the model of cities. We have to change model of the cities that were designed in a patriarchal world, where in the center we had the man between 30 and 35 years, a very productive era. We had neoliberalism, where we started to have a lot of cars. And it was for men between 30 and 50 years, where the man had a car to go to work. And this has changed. Now we have to design cities for men, for women, for the children, for the old people. It should be a city for life, and it should be a feminist city where life is in the center of town, where life is the center of all priorities. And this happens with the contamination, with pollution, and luckily the conscience of people has changed in last times. It would be a paradox that in these kind of cities you open the tap and you get black water. Same thing is what is happening with air. We are breathing black air, and we have a lot of pulmonary diseases in Barcelona. We have got asthma, we've got cancer because of that. We have an urgency. We have an urgency here, and we need people. We need our people to be included in our actions. So we do it with the population. And with the population, we have a climatic emergency plan as of January. And we will have all the cars gone, all the pollution gone within the city. And another thing changing the model of cities, think about our children, the little boys, the little girls. And so we're very much collaborating with our schools where people are being educated, especially in the public and in the private schools in the center of Barcelona. These kids are breathing black air, and of course they are affected. So we have to do all of this for the little ones, because they are our allies, the most important allies. They have no pressures, no economic pressures, and they help us. They help us leading this change of cities. So we work a lot with schools, with the children to change the model of cities. The city should be for life and not for death.
Very often, if you give people something greener, you take away from other people who would like to go into the city. How have you handled that resistance, which will always come?
Yes, there was always a resistance, of course, because if you have an unjust ecological system, an unjust social system, it's because there are some people that are privileged and they want to keep those privileges. You have to take them away. It is absolutely impossible not to take away privileges if you want to do something ecological. So Barcelona wants to do something for the people. Public transport. We have more space for bicycles, but we also need we don't need cowards. We need governance, global governance, also by politicians. We shouldn't be having helps for diesel, for instance, and also for short flights. We shouldn't have short flights. And we should open the consciousness of the people. We should explain and tell about and see what the diagnostics are. We have to talk to the people. We have to explain and show what is possible and how things can be changed. And we have to show that the privileged ones that are making money, that this is suicidal and that we are losing. We are losing so much. So it means try to save the city, to make it more greener, to make it more safe, where our children, where our aged people can be on the streets, can play on the streets, can be happy, and that means a win-win for everyone.
So just to round this up, if you should give one practical advice to other mayors in this room or other mayors who are in the beginning phases of integrating equity into climate action planning, what would the most important advice be from you to them?
Well, the main advice that we could give, of course, we don't have one recipe for everyone. There are different models. We have our model. So it's important to find your own model. And we have a lot of declaration, Paris 4 years ago, a lot of meetings, a lot of declarations, but we need action. This has been said before. And it's also important to speak about the new Green Deal. People live in the city. That's where life is, and it has to be productive. Also, the change is productive, and you have to say this very clear. You can say, well, I want a real new Green Deal. This is not rhetoric. This should be real, and it means that we have to pay for it. We have to do some efforts. It means also that if you put fire to the Amazon forest, you need measures, and the responsible persons, they have to be indicted. You cannot let them go. This is a criminal action, and we have to speak about a real new Green Deal. We have to see what is happening around the world. We have to finish with diesel at short notice. We have to stop with plastic once and for all. We have to eliminate plastic in our food. These globally really will impact the whole production chain. And of course, you need your local measures and the global measures. And the city should be a help for the governments. And I think we can change these paradigms.
Mr. Imamoglu, you just signed up your city to the 2020 deadline pledge, which is like CO2 emissions should peak at 2020. Tell us a bit more for your reasons behind that.
I'm very happy to be here, first of all. Yesterday we signed the agreement with C40. Sorry to be late. But of course we have some actions in our city. But now, as soon as possible, we check the position of Istanbul and we take a photograph of the Istanbul where we are, and we make sure that how we begin for climate action and what is the climate list of Istanbul as soon as possible. So yesterday I saw that we have to sign it and we have to be part of this organization, and very powerful part of this organization, because I'm on the behalf of I'm the mayor on the behalf of 16 million people. So this city needs this kind of politics, and we share all experiences wherever you are in the part of Istanbul, in USA or in Spain or in other countries and other cities, because world is only one. We have many cities, but world is only one. So this is the new generations of Istanbul, millions and millions people ready for this, and in our campaign also we talk about climate, we talk about the problems of the city, and we came all together face to face all problems. In the first 10 problems, maybe 7 or 8 problems are climate problems. So this is our first step to be success in our city. So we work on it together with C40 or another organizations all over the world.
When we are talking about inclusiveness, I mean, you as a newly elected mayor in a city which has received large amounts of refugees and is still receiving large amounts of refugees, what have your approach been to shaping climate action to include them?
If you are mayor, as my friends you know, if you are mayor, you are the mayor of everybody who lives in your city. Doesn't matter he or she is a refugee or citizen, it doesn't matter. We think that human, and we talk with them in this psychology. And my short answer to your question is really courage, and we want to start with these feelings. I want to share with you a quote from İsmet İnönü, who is the second president of Turkey. Honorable people should be as brave as these honorable people. So yes. Now each and every human has the courageous for an inclusive future where then can share a just of life. And the most important and vital courage is the courage to see, accept, and express the truth. And one point that we need the courage of Spartacus against slavery and Mandela against apartheid. These feelings is very important, but now we know that there is very good examples in the world, as a Greta Thunberg. Young people like her are an example of such a courage. You know, there is many Gretas in Istanbul. Really, I see them in the streets. And just 2 weeks ago, Atlas Sarafoğlu She is 11-year-old, a girl, and 15 activist children of similar age visited me, and many other politicians like me. And these courageous children wanted us to develop new and effective policies related to the environment, especially climate change. They are right, because some facts are obvious. Scientists don't even have to warn you of these facts. I remember when I was in university, it was snowed many times. It snowed many times in winter, and snow would remain 4 days, 5 days in Istanbul. But now in Istanbul there is no snow, and climate is changing. And as my friend told, there are many floods in Istanbul, especially the previous years. These floods mostly affect the older neighbors of the city and with the poor neighbors. Unexpected rains cause serious damage on agricultural areas in Istanbul and around Istanbul. As a politician who won the 2 elections in a year, I can say that citizens of Istanbul supported me really in hopes of better quality of life, the first thing, and not for mega engineering projects. Forget that projects. Just feel the nature. And I came in refugees. Very few cities in the world have as big or immigrant population than my city. Very few cities in the world, because 1 million only Syrian people live in Istanbul now. And the others, refugees, 1.2 million. We have the big responsibility to create better quality of life for these immigrants. For this goal, we started to work with them as well in every issue, including climate change issue, what they need and what they want. And you have a question?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
I have, because time is running. So
okay. Okay. We are also need a cooperation. I want to say something lasting. Now in the world, refugee problem is not the problem of that city or that country. Refugee problem is the problem of whole the world. 4 million people in Turkey and 1.2 million people in Istanbul, and it started 5 years ago. In 5 years, it's a crazy. So we have to work on it. We need your cooperation, international cooperation, and help on this big issue very soon to be together for this problem. Yes.
Being a moderator is rather stressful to see a watch counting down second by second now.
Okay.
I have one hot burning question, and it's going to be the last one, and you have 3 seconds to answer it, all of you.
Okay.
What do you say to people who don't see climate change as a priority in your city? Latoya.
Well, this is actually what I was trying to allude to on the front end. As we're seeing, again, these rainfalls coming faster and harder, and when you say, hey, climate is changing, you have folks in your community say, oh, I don't want to hear about the climate change. Well, we need to continue to have this level of support, C40, and really mayors around the world where we have one another's back and getting outside of our bubble, because our people feel like they're the only ones that are flooding or at the highest levels. They don't seem to see outside of themselves, although a couple of weeks ago, Houston had 42 inches of rain in 24 hours. It's like, come on. So it means being able to use our resources wisely on the ground, doing the work, helping them retrofit their homes, hazard mitigation programs, even elevation, holding water, showing them that they are a part of the change, that has to be made in order to sustain ourselves. And that gives you the platform and the foundation you need to also continue to do the work. So it's the balance that we have to strike.
Ada, your 10 seconds. What do you say?
A la ciudadanía que se resiste a la idea.
Well, those citizens that oppose the idea of climate change, I would say to them, think about your children. Your children have the right to live. They have the right to be happy. Our generation is going against the rights of children that are yet to be born, and they have the right to live. They have the right to live a better life than us. So I should tell them to allow everybody to live their lives, to allow the planet to regenerate itself, and to allow us to have a better world to look forward to.
Panel, now it's blinking red up here, 000. I thank you very much for your words, and thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
I was lucky between two.
Thank you so much, Michael Jalner, and thank you very much to the mayors of Barcelona, New Orleans, and Istanbul. And congratulations with the membership of C40 cities to Istanbul. Now we turn to air quality. 9 out of 10 people around the world are breathing dirty air, with 95% of residents of C40 cities living in areas that exceed WHO's guidelines for air pollution. Even in the wealthiest cities, people in vulnerable and marginalized neighborhoods are exposed to the dirtiest air, as these populations tend to live near busy roads, industrial areas, and other sources of pollution. We'll now hear from mayors and experts how cleaning the air, using the latest science and technology in cities, can help create a healthier and more equitable society. So I'm pleased now to welcome to the stage our moderator for the next session, Ansa Williams, head of the Environment Program at Bloomberg Philanthropies. Welcome up here, Ansa. And panelist Anna König Hjalmar, Mayor of Stockholm, Director General of Beijing Municipal Ecology and Environment Bureau, Mr. Chen Tiang, Jorge Muniz-Wells, Mayor of Lima, and Dr. Maria Nera, Director of Public Health, Environment and Social Determinants of Health Department, also at the WHO. Welcome, all of you.
My name is Antha Williams. I'm the head of environmental programs at Bloomberg Philanthropies. And we have a fantastic group of panelists here today on the front lines of the fight to clean up our air. Just to situate us a bit, at Bloomberg Philanthropies, our mission is to ensure better, longer lives for the greatest number of people. And of course, dirty air is a huge threat to better, longer lives. We heard from the Secretary General, there's 7 million people a year who die prematurely because of the risks presented by dirty air. And it's pretty astonishing that 95% of residents of C40 cities, the leading cities in the world, are living in areas with dirty air. So it's quite an urgent topic for all of us to confront. And as I've said, we have a great group of panelists to address that with us today. I want to turn first to Mayor of Stockholm, Anna König Hjalmar. As a C40 vice chair and one of the many signatories of this morning's declaration on clean air in cities, how would you characterize this new declaration, and what does it mean for the work on the ground in Stockholm?
For us, it helps us push impact and measures forward, especially when it comes to the national level, and to put pressure on the national governments to help us find new technique, especially for monitoring air quality. Because we all know about the risk when it comes to health with bad air quality. And we also know what the cost is. That's why World Economic Forum said that in Davos, said that just climate changes is the biggest threat to the world's economy ahead. So it's both economically costly and it's a loss of production. And these kind of arguments we can also bring to the national level. And we are doing a lot in the city when it comes to congestion charges. We plant trees. We work with fossil fuel-free buses all over the city. And we have a bid on, we have forbidden studded tires because we are a cold country with a lot of snow. So in some area we have forbidden studded tires. But what we want is real-time monitoring of air quality, and to have emission zones that could be dynamic. But we are now not allowed to have that when it comes to legislation. That's one example that we are trying to push the national level to give us the tools needed ahead, because then we can have monitoring in the city, real-time data, and dynamic emission zones instead of permanent zones, because that is much more controversial, I would say. So that's a few examples, but as a city we reduced our CO2 emission by 60%, but now we want to go even further, and then when we bring the data and the new technique, I think.
That's a great example, and Mike Bloomberg often says you can't manage what you don't measure. Yeah. I think we see in cities around the world the importance of the real-time monitoring, both for policymaking and also for engaging the public. I want to turn to our representative from the municipal government of Beijing. Beijing, of course, has quite famously worked to confront its air pollution challenges and seen quite some success over the last 5 years. I hope you could speak to what specific measures you've taken and whether there are any of those measures that other cities across the C40 network could implement. And I want to remind people, you have translation devices if you need them. We're doing multiple languages across our panel here.
好的，非常高兴有机会在这里跟大家分享北京大区
discussions and to share with you some of the experiences of Beijing. Building a beautiful home is mankind's common aspiration, and breathing fresh air is, of course, our common pursuit. Since 1998, we began to control pollution. So it's been about 20 years. So in the last 20 years, we've realized marked air quality improvement. Against the backdrop of social as well as economic development, we've managed to create a win-win situation. In the last 20 years, the population of Beijing, of course, has grown very rapidly. It has increased by about 7 times, GDP 11 times, and motor vehicle population is about 6 million at this point. At the same time, we've seen an improvement in the air quality. In terms of the concentration of the main pollutants has decreased about 40%, and with other such as SO2 and NO2 decreased about up to 95%. Due to time constraints, I'm going to limit my discussion to just some key points. One is the improvements is a result of scientific research and improvement. This includes some of legal legislation, legal measures, and economic measures. For example, we have some incentives and subsidies, as well as science and technology measures, so that, for example, we also monitor the position of Beijing when it comes to the levels of pollutants. And we also increase our control of pollutants and also raise awareness of the public at large with regard to how serious the adverse effects of pollutants. So we focus on coal combustion pollution. So we use clean coal. In the last few years, we've decreased the use of coal by 90%. So SA2, it was more than 120 micrograms per cubic meter has been decreased to only 5 micrograms per cubic meter. And of course, in terms of public transportation, we've also been optimizing the facilities that are provided. And we also have very high standards when it comes to emissions and oil quality. So we realize the pollution problem in China, and specifically in Beijing, is very serious. So we try to eliminate the old model of vehicles so that we increase the new vehicles. For example, taxis are now electrified. We use electric vehicles for taxis, and also increase the number of electric vehicles for public transportation. And also, we also have a catalog of pollutant industries. So we remove more than 3,000 polluting companies from the cities. And industries are also asked to apply cleaner production and environmental-friendly technical reforms. And also what's worthy to be mentioned here is that we also link the regions in Beijing in terms of the control. For example, Beijing is more than 16,000 square kilometers in terms of land area. So region-to-region connection is very important so that we can synergize the pollutant control as well as information sharing. So together, the regions, the areas or the districts work together. So this year, in March of this year, at the UN Environment, I understand the UN Environment released a report on Beijing's air pollution control process in the last 20 years and has indicated that Beijing's experience is interesting and can be shared with other cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. I think you touched on a few important themes, some of which Mayor Koenig, your mail, picked up as well in terms of what the national government can do. So a lot of tools in the toolbox in China in terms of the work at the national level on policies that, for example, close coal plants in order to clean up air pollution or procure additional electric vehicles, where China, of course, is quite a leader. I want to turn to the mayor of Lima, Peru, Jorge Munoz Wells, to ask about the C40 Clean Air Cities Declaration of this morning, where 35 C40 cities have now signed on. And as a signatory to that declaration, can you share some of the key measures that you plan to take in the city of Lima to clean up the air and meet the commitments of the declaration?
Sí, primero que nada, muchas gracias.
Yes, firstly, I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel in order to share with you the situation in my country. Lima is the capital city of Peru. It is a huge city. It has more than 10 million inhabitants. It is a city that is facing many challenges, and what we have done is to take citizens and make citizens the center of our city management. We all have the right to a clean air, and we all have to make efforts to achieve that clean air. And there are different sources of pollution. It has just been said that 90% of people worldwide are breathing dirty air, and in Lima, I would say that that percentage is even higher. And this is due, for example, to internal combustion engines in vehicles. It is also due to wood stoves in the suburbs of cities. So what can we do? What are the specific measures we can take so that citizens are at the center? Well, we can carry out different activities, different measures and actions. And in Lima, firstly, we have signed this declaration on clean air cities, but we are also taking action because, as Seti already said, this is the decade of action, and we must take action. And that is what we are doing. The first thing we have done is have a whole network of measurement stations to know what the situation is and how we can move forward. We have also started introducing catalytic converters in municipal vehicles to serve as an example of how to have vehicles that do not pollute. We are also cooperating with restaurants to reduce their emissions and the emissions from their stoves and kitchens. But we are also carrying out other policies. For example, we plan to plant 2 million trees in the next 3 years. This is one of our most important policies. And in order to carry it out, we have established an alliance with many actors in our city. We believe that SDG 17 is fundamental, and we must make the most of it. We must create alliances to achieve specific goals. But we also have other projects in our city which are vital. For example, we are creating more pedestrian areas in the center of Lima, and we are also promoting the use of non-polluting vehicles, such as bicycles, for example. And Copenhagen is a perfect example of this. We still have a lot to learn in this sense, but we are slowly moving towards these pedestrianized areas, and we also would like to become an example in this sense. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. One element that you touched on is the state-of-the-art, which we're seeing across C40 cities, air quality monitoring, source apportionment, and then air quality management systems, which increasingly I think are taking off and can be replicated even as we begin to think about the lessons beyond the C40 network of cities. I want to turn to Dr. Nehra from the WHO, the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization plays such an important role in just signaling the level of priority of air pollution as a risk factor. At Bloomberg Philanthropies, your work is very close to our heart because Mike Bloomberg serves as an ambassador to the World Health Organization on non-communicable diseases, air pollution, of course, being a really leading risk factor. So I wondered if you could just talk to us about the World Health Organization guidelines on air quality and what they mean for cities around the world.
Yes, thank you very much, and we appreciate enormously what you have achieved this morning. The declaration that was signed this morning is absolutely fantastic because it will contribute to reduce this figure that has been mentioned already several times, the 7 million premature deaths that, according to WHO estimates, are dying every year due to exposure to air pollution. I think even if everybody has repeated this figure, I don't think we realize what that means. We are talking about almost the city of Lima with 10 million disappearing every year. Imagine the population of Lima, 7 million of Lima disappearing every year, and that is totally acceptable. It makes air pollution one of the biggest public health challenges we are facing today. So why the air quality guidelines? We look at what we are breathing, how toxic it is, and what it will represent, what will be the level of pollution that will be acceptable. And there is no level that is acceptable. So that's why we call about air quality guidelines. We look at the PM 2.5, which are the ones that are more dangerous, and we set a limit. 95% of the global population is breathing air that is going beyond that limit. Obviously, it's not the same. The limit can be twice the recommended by WHO if you live in cities like Stockholm or Copenhagen. is almost there. You are almost there. And obviously it goes maybe 20 times more if you live in other cities that maybe we don't need to mention, but I'm sure that you all have good examples. Let me just tell you, I'm a medical doctor, I'm not a mayor. I would love to, because I understand that you have an incredible power and you know, no pressure on you, but the world today is urban and the health today is urban. So no pressure, but be aware that you are a little bit ministers of health as well. And the health of the population is very much on your hands. The toxic air that we are breathing, it goes to our lungs. That is clear for everybody. Normally our lungs are pink. What we see now is very dark lungs of people who never smoke. So we have 17 years old teenagers that they have the lungs of a very old smoker. They look like they have been smoking for 30 years and their lungs have been exposed to that. This is totally unacceptable. But the thing is, I don't know how many of you have been presenting or having yourself an asthma crisis. Believe me, if you have one, you will never forget it. This anxiety, the fact that you cannot breathe is terrible, but it's not just asthma. The air pollution can cause lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, pneumonia, and then stroke, and then as well ischemic heart disease. So all of those non-communicable diseases that Mayor Bloomberg is such a champion on that, but unless we tackle air pollution, we will not be able to finish with those diseases. The bad news, the air pollutants that are reaching our lungs, most of them, the smallest one, they go to our bloodstream. And from there, they can reach every organ, including our brain. And the bad news is that today we have thousands of scientific evidence papers that are proving that our brain is affected as well. So imagine that our cognitive function, so our intelligence, is at risk. We are decreasing our IQ. Our cognitive function as a society is going down. So we are getting a little bit less intelligent than we should be. Maybe this is the reason why we are not taking more action against air pollution. I don't know.
The time is not right to be losing our intellectual ability, because the challenges have never been bigger. I think those are some very sobering statistics, and to underscore the 7 million people per year who are dying prematurely from air pollution, that makes air pollution the 5th leading risk factor of any problem in the world, and the leading environmental risk factor. I think the good news for our work is that the exact same policies and programs that we can use and implement to combat climate change also clean up air quality. And so, Mayor, I'd like to turn back to you to speak to the fact that you've set both these very ambitious air pollution and also climate change targets, and what are the opportunities that you see to tackle those twin challenges together?
I can see that that we can collaborate cities in C40, for example, to get inspiration, because even though I represent a city that we have better air quality than ever, I would say, but we still, we are measuring some streets. We want to make measures, and because our citizens know exactly if the air quality is bad, they will let us know because they can feel it, and if we can present the data, they will also put pressure on us. That's why it's so important with this transparency towards the citizens. But of course, I can also use this in my international network in Europe. Next week, I'm meeting Frans Timmermans, who's the Vice President of the Commission, and talking about his new Green Deal, and how we can work together with that to push European countries on a member state level even further, and how we as a city also can use our momentum to make the nation states more ambitious, because we need that. I talked to my colleague in Warsaw, and in Warsaw, a baby 1 year old has so much congestion, it's about 1,000 cigarettes from the year one. So it's really critical now. So we have to really work together with all the citizens. And that's why we are here and why we are pushing and this kind of declaration forward so we can have the right effect on our measurements.
That's great. Thank you so much. Mayor Munoz-Wells, I want to turn to you with this question, but then I'll just fair warning to the other panelists. I'm going to ask you to answer the same question in rapid fire succession as our wrap-up question. But Mayor Munoz-Wells, a child born today will be 31 years old in the year 2050. It's a year we talk about in terms of a lot of our climate and clean air targets. What do you hope the air quality will be like in Lima in that 31-year period? And what are the actions that need to take place now to make that vision a reality?
First of all, you have to be aware of what is happening. And you have to have a very clear politic. You have to tell people the action plan, you have to explain it, and then you have to act. And there are a lot of concrete things that you can do, very clear things in my country and in other countries as well. Whenever there is a government change, the action plans, just stop and they said, oh, I'll start all over again with something else. So we have to plan really for the future, and we have to have a governance that permits that these things really have an orientation towards the future and will not be interrupted. And I listened to the doctor, and it really is something that is happening in all cities. These are non-transmittable diseases that everyone has in cities. And of these non-transmittable diseases, it's because of the air, because of the polluted water, and we have to deal with the situation, but with clear actions. I just told you that we have to be prepared for the future. We should prepare for 2050, and we have to have very clear ideas of what we want to reach, what we want to achieve. And now we have a recuperation plan for the historical center of Lima. And this will allow us to show a concept that is very important, that people should walk. People don't walk. People should walk more to come from point A to point B, and they will be healthier if they walk more. And this is also a change of paradigm. And then I will stop because you asked me to be real quick. And we want to change the model that everyone needs to use a car. In South America, in Peru, a car is just a sign of status. People just don't walk. They use the car all the time. And we want to destroy this philosophy and say, well, the pedestrian should be number one in the pyramid of mobility. And this is it's a very healthy mobility. And then after that, it will be public transport. So this is our vision for the future.
Thanks, thank you. Mr. Chen Tian, I will ask you to answer the same question, but very quickly, 3 sentences. The vision for Beijing's air quality 30 years from today and how you get there.
I think we have already very excellent results in Beijing, but we still have not met global standards. So we will continue to do what we do best, which is to control and monitor air pollution, as well as other pollutants. Furthermore, I think in the last 20 years, we've seen the achievements of Beijing. And how have we achieved this? Because we've learned from our international partners. So I think it's important to learn from each other to create a beautiful future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. with apologies to our dear Mayor of Stockholm here, I'm going to skip you, and it's only appropriate, I think, to close this panel with a medical doctor. And I loved your takeaway quote that the mayors here are also ministers of health. So I'll ask you the same concluding question to have our last remarks.
Well, that will be in my prescription. Since I'm a medical doctor, I will prescribe. You know, this is what we do best. So my prescription to you is measure your level of ambition on the number of lives that you can save, the number of asthma cases that you can reduce. We can do that for you. I know that the first part of my presentation was very negative about diseases. Now is the positive part. Any action you take to improve the sustainable transport, to remove from Beijing all the industrial processes, all the measures you are putting, you are generating health benefits that can be quantified. We can do that as WHO. We can sell it back to you, and you can tell your citizens, look at how I am protecting your health. Of course, if you do it in 1 year, you will save a lot of lives and quality of life. If you take 30 years, it depends how many lives you think are acceptable, how many deaths you think are acceptable. So my prescription is your level of ambition will give you votes, and you can measure it on the health benefits of that. Thank you.
Thank you to yet another panel with representatives from 3 different continents. Somehow I think it's fascinating. I remember when there was this last gathering 3 years ago in Mexico. It was as if, yeah, there were things happening here and there, but I think the fascinating thing about this meeting is to observe how many innovative actions and innovative thinking is taking place all over the planet. It's not just concentrated in a few cities. I really find that encouraging. Now, what a morning we have had. A Prime Minister, a UN Secretary General, a climate justice activist, numerous mayors, experts, and what have we. So now, you have deserved a break. Like yesterday, between 12 or from 12 to 1, you have the deep dive sessions. You will know yourself where you want to go. It's on this floor and downstairs. And again, like yesterday, from 1 o'clock, there will be lunch served, totally vegetarian. By the way, this venue has the green hotel key, which means that it lives up to a long list of environmental standards. And for this meeting, only vegetarian meals are served. So bon appetit, enjoy the break, but be back here for the last stretch, starting at 2:30 sharp, where we begin with Mark Watts and Gunhild Stordalen, and we will end with Alexandria Cortez. Thank you so much, and bon appetit.